Hey guys, it's Sloan from Lake Mary High School, and today we're going to be reading Ivy and Bean, which was one of my favorite books as a child. And my mom used to call me Bean because I would always get into trouble. So, let's get to the story. Chapter 1, No Thanks. Before Bean met Ivy, she didn't like her. Bean's mother was always saying that Bean should try playing with the new girl across the street, but Bean didn't want to. "She's 7 years old, just like you," said her mother, "and she seems like such a nice girl. You could be friends." Here's a picture. She's all in that book, getting those reads in. "I already have friends," said Bean, and that was true. Bean did have a lot of friends, but really she didn't want to play with Ivy because her mother was right. Ivy did seem like such a nice girl, even from across the street. She looked nice, but nice, Bean knew, is another word for boring. Ivy sat nicely on her front steps. Bean zipped around her yard and yelled. Ivy had long, curly red hair pushed back with a sparkly headband. Bean's hair was black, and it only came to her chin because it got tangled if it was any longer. When Bean put on a headband, it fell off. Ivy wore a dress every day. Bean wore a dress when her mother made her. Ivy was always reading a big book. Bean never read big books. Reading made her jumpy. Bean was sure that Ivy never stomped in puddles. She was sure that Ivy never smashed rocks to find gold. There's another one. She was sure that Ivy had never once in her whole life climbed a tree and fallen out. Bean got bored just looking at her. So when her mother said she should play with Ivy, Bean just shook her head. "No thanks," she said. "You could give it a try. You might like her," said Bean's mom. "All aboard, next train for Boring is leaving now," yelled Bean. Her mother frowned. "That's not very nice, Bean." "I was nice. I said no thanks," said Bean. "I just don't want to, okay?" Okay, her mother sighed. "Have it your way." So for weeks and weeks, Bean didn't play with Ivy. But one day, something happened that changed her mind. Chapter 2, Bean hatches a plan. It all began because Bean was playing a trick on her older sister. Bean's older sister's name was Nancy. She was 11. Nancy thought that Bean was a pain and a pest. Bean thought Nancy was a boogerhead. Ever since she turned 11, Nancy had been acting like she was Bean's mother. She ordered Bean around in a grown-up voice. "Comb your hair, no more pretzels, brush your teeth, say please." Bean's mother said that Nancy was going through a stage. Bean knew what that meant. That meant Nancy was bossy. Bean also knew that nobody likes bossy kids, so she was trying to help Nancy be done with her stage. Here's how she helped. She bugged Nancy until Nancy freaked out. Bean thought that was pretty helpful. The afternoon that Bean got her a great idea, she was shopping with her mother and Nancy. Actually, Bean was being dragged along by her mother and Nancy. Bean hated shopping. Nancy loved it. Nancy was trying on skirts. Lots of skirts. She put on a purple skirt. She looked at her front in the mirror, then she turned to the side, then she turned around and tried to look at her behind. "Looks good," said Bean. "Let's go." "Be patient just a little longer, Bean," said Bean's mother. "I think it's cute, honey," she said to Nancy. Nancy looked in the mirror some more. "Do you think the pockets are dumb?" "I like the pockets," said Bean's mother. Get it, moaned Bean. She had never been so bored in her entire life. She was so bored she fell on the floor. Then she took a tiny peek up at the lady in the dressing room next door. "Yow! Get up, Bean," said her mother. "This minute." Bean got up and sat on the triangle seat again. She waited. Nancy looked at herself. "I kind of like it," said Nancy, "but it costs $40. That's all my money. I could get 2 shirts for $40. "Don't be a tightwad," said Bean. She had just learned that word. It meant someone who didn't like to spend money. "Don't call your sister a tightwad," said Bean's mother. Bean saw Nancy's eyes looking at her in the mirror. "Tightwad," Bean mouthed, without any sound. Nancy's eyes got narrow and so quick that her mother didn't see. She stuck out her tongue. Then Nancy turned to her mother and said, "I think the skirt costs too much, Mom. I think I'd rather try on some tops." Bean knew that Nancy was just being slow on purpose, just to drive her crazy. Bean thought about kicking her in the shin, but then she got the idea. It was a great idea. It was also a helpful idea. One that would teach Nancy not to be such a tightwad. And best of all, her idea would make Nancy freak out. "You'll be sorry," Bean mouthed to Nancy. Chapter 3. The Ghost of Pancake Court. Here's another picture. She's in a bush. Bean was hiding inside a big round bush in her front yard. The bush was right next to the sidewalk, and it was very scratchy and sticky inside. But Bean needed to be in the bush for her plan to work. Here's how Bean's plan went. She took a $20 bill out of Nancy's purse and taped a long thread to it. She put the $20 bill on the sidewalk. Then she held onto the other end of the thread and climbed into the bush. Nancy would be coming home from school soon. She would see the money on the sidewalk. She would bend down to pick it up. Bean would quickly pull the money away, and then Nancy would freak out. Bean could hardly wait. There was only one problem. Nancy didn't come. Bean sat inside the bush for a long time. A branch poked her arm. Leaves fell down her shirt. She itched. She waited. Nothing happened. It was very quiet. Bean was hardly ever this quiet for this long. Because there was nothing else to do, she looked at the house across the street. Really, it wasn't across the street, it was around the street. Ben loved her street. The first reason was because of its name, Pancake Court. The second reason was that it ended in a big circle right in front of Bean's house. Her dad called it a cul-de-sac. Bean called it cool. If Bean started riding her bicycle at the end of the block and pedaled really, really, really hard, she could whiz around the circle, tilting low over the sidewalk like a motorcycle racer. Slam! Bean looked up. She saw Ivy come out onto her front porch and plop down on the top step. Bean squinted at her. Ivy looked strange. She wasn't wearing a dress today. She was wearing a black bathrobe with lots of little pieces of paper stuck to it. Weird, thought Bean. She squinted some more. Instead of a big book, Ivy was carrying a stick, painted gold. Bean made a face. What a goony costume, she thought. What a dork. Ivy sat. She didn't do anything. She just sat there all by herself. That was another strange thing about Ivy. She didn't mind being alone. She never played with anyone. Bean played with everyone. Big kids, little kids, all the kids in the neighborhood played with Bean. Even Crummy Matt, who was so... Crummy, he threw other kids' toys into the road, wanted to play with Bean. She took care of all the little kids. When they fell down and got blood all over their knees, Bean would take them home and get Band-Aids. The big kids let her play with them because she had good ideas, like seeing how many backyards they could cross without touching the ground. Bean loved big groups of kids playing big games like pirates or hide and seek. Bean couldn't help it. She just had to stick her tongue out and say, then she just had to turn around and wiggle her behind at Nancy. That's it, Nancy yelled. I'm getting Mom. She stormed into the house. For a minute, Bean felt happy. She loved making Nancy mad, but when Nancy was gone, Bean began to worry. Mom hated it when she did more than one bad thing at a time. Bean counted, taking the money, lying about her ankle, leaving the yard without asking, and wiggling her behind at Nancy. 4 things. 5 if you counted pretending to be a ghost. Bean was going to be in big trouble. How big? No dessert for sure. No videos for a week maybe. But it could be even worse. Her mom might send her to her room for the rest of the day. Bean hated that. Hide. Bean looked up. She had forgotten all about Ivy. Ivy was sitting on her porch. She had been watching the whole time. She knew that the ghost of Mr. Killip was really Bean inside the bush. Bean expected her to be mad, but she didn't look mad. She looked excited. Hide, she said again. Thought Bean. Maybe boring Ivy was right. If her mom couldn't find her, she couldn't send her to her room. If she stayed out until dark, her parents would stop being mad and they'd start being worried. Her mom might say, "Oh, my poor little Bean, my poor little baby," and then they'd be so happy to see her when she came limping home that they probably wouldn't punish her at all. They might even let her have seconds at dessert. Okay, she said to Ivy. Where? Follow me. Ivy came down the stairs and slipped behind a bush growing against her house. Bean followed her and crouched down under the wide leaves. No, get up. This is just the beginning, said Ivy. I'm going to take you to a secret spot. This isn't it, said Bean. The bush looked pretty good to her. No, this is the passageway. Ivy pressed her back against the house and edged along. Bean edged along too, the wall scraping her back. They turned a corner and edged some more. Ivy's house was big. Halt, said Ivy, and Bean halted. Now, said Ivy, close your eyes and I'll take you to the secret spot. What? How come I have to close my eyes? Because it's a secret, said Ivy. Duh. Bean couldn't argue with that. Ivy looked like a wimp, but she didn't talk like one. Bean closed her eyes. She felt Ivy take her by the elbow, and together they went down some steps. A door opened. More steps. Cool. Damp air blew in Bean's face. Then they went up some steps. Another door opened. They were outside again. Ivy was taking Bean through some tall grass. "Shh," said Ivy. Bean froze. "Crouch down," said Ivy. Bean crouched. There was a silence. "Okay, you can get up now." "What happened?" asked Bean. "Spies," said Ivy. Bean figured Ivy was probably making that up. "Now you can open your eyes," Ivy said. And that is it for chapter 4. I will see you guys next week for the other chapters of Bean and Ivy. Thank you.